Welcome to this episode of the Strong Kind Podcast. This episode is with Dylan Carmody-Ruotolo. Dylan is a physical therapist and a sports performance coach. He's also a native Santa Barbara, and I'm jealous of that because I love Santa Barbara. Dylan is somebody who, whenever he posts or whenever I see any of his content, he makes me think, which I really appreciate. Dylan and me had a great conversation oriented around physical therapy, sports performance, the future of physical therapy, and ultimately just how to become a well-rounded practitioner. And it was just a great discussion. I really appreciated Dylan's time and his insight. A lot of good stuff in here for strength and performance, physical therapists, people just looking to learn and to think. So again, go check out Dylan. You can find him at dcr.dpt. I'll also link his other avenues to contact Dylan in the show notes. So thanks again so much for being here. I really appreciate it. If you are struggling with pain and injury and looking for help rehabbing yourself, reach out to me at dr.dave.strengthandkindness on Instagram. I'd love to help you out in any way I can. Thanks so much for being here. Peace. All right, I'm here with Dylan Carmody-Ruotolo.
Crushed it.
Was that pretty good? Okay, cool.
Yeah, nailed it.
So I've followed Dylan for a while, and Dylan, we don't know each other we don't really know each other other than from the Instagramosphere type of thing. Whenever Dylan posts, he makes me think. So, and I think part of being a good coach and part of being a good physio, probably being a good human is thinking, right? But so I just wanted to bring Dylan on because there's a lot of things that Dylan's doing that I think are really cool. He's also I think a little different than me. I think Dylan's really, really objective. And I'm almost probably too subjective sometimes, right? And I don't mean to say that I'm not objective at all. And I don't mean to say that Dylan's not subjective at all. But Dylan, take me through your arc as a practitioner and what drove you to go to PT school. We'll get into California and all that because we'll talk about that later because I'm jealous of Dylan's upbringing in Santa Barbara, California now. But yeah, what was your upbringing like? Why did you decide to go to therapy school? Well, would you do anything different? Sometimes that's a really good question for people.
Yeah, man. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. So first of all, I guess it's a very short background on who I am. Just I don't assume that my name is very large these days or ever. So when it comes to who I am, my name's Dylan. I am a physical therapist, strength and conditioning coach, and all I'll say is a wannabe sports scientist. I enjoy the idea of sports science and engage with it, but I don't program. I don't know how to code. I don't know how to do any of the highly technical skills behind it. I treat and I coach part-time in Bend, Oregon, and then I also work full-time at Vault, which is an objective technology company that creates objective measurement equipment. So how I got there is a bit of a funky story. I feel like I have a pretty standard story of how I got into PT school and the interest in performance, where I was about 10 years old, started limping around. My parents thought I was faking the injury itself. They're like, he's just limping to get attention, so we're gonna ignore it. Turns out I had a painless limp that I just kept on. I didn't even realize I was doing it. People that probably think about, probably a 10-year-old active kid, painless limp, that's probably some sort of hip pathology. So I had Perthes, which was pretty much a avascular necrosis of the femoral head. So ended up getting exposure to orthopedic surgeons, to physical therapists, to a whole host of, rehab type services. And throughout that process, I became more and more interested in it. But again, how interested in doing clamshells are you at 10 years old? It was more just my parents were that's kind of a cool profession. Let's keep that in the back pocket for when he's older and all those sorts of things. And then, I continued to play sports growing up, pretty much played everything under the sun. And then once it came time to apply to college and all those sorts of things, I was I don't really care for engineering. I don't really care for doing anything truly medicinal or being a doctor or anything like that. So let's just go the strength coach route and see how that goes. So I went to Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, for my undergrad degree, and loved it. I studied kinesiology, worked as an S&C coach in the weight room for better part of 18 months just before COVID. And had just like, the entire time I was like, no, there's no way I'm going to do PT. Strength and conditioning is my love. Like just being on the floor coaching people was like some of the most fun I've had like as a practitioner. And so like that has always been something where I'm like, all right, getting back in the collegiate setting is always something on the list. But I ended up telling myself, I was like, okay, I should at least apply to like one or two schools, see if there's an interest, and just kind of go from there. Ended up applying to a school across the country just because I wanted something different, and ended up getting in. So I was like, all right, well, let's go. So I went to Jefferson, which is a primarily medical school in Center City, Philadelphia, but they also obviously have a PT program. So I went there for 3 years, came out and started working in a sports performance clinic in Portland, Oregon called Apex PWR. And after a couple months of working there, my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, was a PA student, and she was going on her rotations, which then kind of was like, all right, I can't really pick up a travel contract because PA rotations are very last minute and they're only like 5 to 6 weeks at a time. And so it was kind of a thing of like, hey, I need to do something that has stability that is more remote. So started online coaching, started working with an organization called Informed Performance, doing podcast hosting and some educational resource kind of curation. And then I also started working at Vault, which I still work at today. And now that the rotation side of our life is over, we've settled in Bend, and that's kind of bringing us here to present day.
Nice. How has like okay, so I mean, first and foremost, the Perthes, like, how was the trajectory of that? Like, so just to really briefly, you said it, it's like you're a kid, you're 11, 12, I think you said. How old were you?
Like 10ish, like fourth grade, however old you are in fourth grade. That's what it was.
So basically, like, they figure out that you're not getting blood flow to your femoral head, right? So like it's basically dying, right? Which like that's a little scary, right? So, but how did that course of treatment go, and like what was the trajectory of that? I'm curious about that, because a lot of times this is kind of the classic like physical therapist arc, is like something happens and we're like, oh, we get interested in the body, we get interested in like performance or coming back from these things. But like, what was your journey like with that?
Yeah, I mean the journey itself was one of those things where like I kind of, I guess I probably tuned it out a little bit more. I had, nowadays, if you catch it early enough and all those sorts of things, it's more often than not a non-surgical case. But back then, I guess as the kids say these days, it was a surgical case. So I ended up going through a surgery at Cottage Hospital, which you and I have chatted through. So I had a surgery that kind of involved, some femoral neck kind of replacement, where they, cut part of it, shaded over the actual femoral neck slightly, and then they kind of put pins and screws in just to kind of recenter the joint. And then ended up taking 6 weeks or 8 weeks in a body cast from my sternum down to my toes, and then was in a wheelchair for a little bit, then kind of did the whole rehab side of things. So that's kind of like the process and what happened there. To be honest, I was always interested in sports, and I think the injury itself was just like an excuse to like talk to people that have also worked in sports as well. When I look back, it was never like, oh, I really like doing physical therapy type stuff. It was more like, no, I just want to like be in a performance environment. And if rehab was the thing that allowed me to kind of sink into the performance environment, then awesome. But if it was something else, I would have also very easily gone there. Like I entertained the idea of sports marketing for a while, but then I was like, oh wait, you don't actually hang out in a performance environment. You just like market the thing. And I was like, I don't care for that. I'd rather just like be in that setting. So.
Yeah. Well, and now, I mean, based on like what I know of you and just like Vald, and like, okay, like where do you sit on the continuum between rehab? More and more PTs are calling themselves performance PTs, which is both good and bad, right? Like, what's the criterion for that? Like, 60-year-old ladies need to perform, right? What are we talking about? And like, But like, where are you at? What are your thoughts? I was almost thinking this through this last night. Like, what am I gonna ask Dylan? And like, some of it's like, what is like the future of like physical therapy, right? What's your perception of that, right? Because I think there's more and more just people are acknowledging this giant overlap between rehab and performance, and also like self-efficacious care, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, where are you at on that? Thinking about the future of our profession and that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start out with the performance side of things, and then we can jump into anything else. But I am a big fan of operationalizing and defining terms, just because if you don't have that, then we can be talking about performance physical therapy meaning two different things. And then, we can get into an argument and it's just like, well, this is my definition. You're like, well, oh, I didn't think about it that way. And so it's like, okay,
Yeah.
we're just screaming at each other for no apparent reason. So the way I look at performance physical therapy is, or being a performance therapist, um, is essentially being a somebody who is there working with somebody and responsible for achieving, like, returning to a terminal task. And that terminal task can have a varied definition. Most often terminal task is, the sport performance, right? Now that doesn't mean that as a physical therapist you should be responsible for being a sports performance coach, nor does it mean that you automatically have the credibility to be a strength and conditioning coach and a return to play like a specialist either. So I think that's where we kind of get things wrong, so to speak, is physical therapy, because it is a terminal degree. A lot of times people will say, okay, well, I have enough education to back the fact that, like, I should know these sorts of things. When in reality, if like you don't like, PT school and physical therapy teaches more about the integumentary system than it does about, return to play considerations,
Yeah.
right? So like,
Yeah.
it's to no fault of a PT's that they are not prepared for, doing a full, like, return to play for a hamstring injury, so to speak, like, for example. But I think people, like, automatically assume that they should, and so then they jump in and they call themselves a performance physical therapist without having any prior experience working in performance or working, within like a typical, high performance setting, which is fine, right? For the most part, like, if you're responsible for somebody getting back to their task and have reasonable success with it, I think there's grounds to stand on to make that argument. However, I do think that nowadays you'll see, like, ads for, like, we're hiring a performance physical therapist, and then you walk into the clinic and you're like, this is not just, like, there's not enough room in this clinic for there to be any, like, reasonable amount of performance, let alone the equipment that they have and all these sorts of things. So that's kind of my take on performance physical therapy and just performance in general. I do think that rather than, like, I think that physical therapy, strength and conditioning, and sports science should still have their reasonably separate pathways, right, to when it comes to education. Like, I don't think the education system should combine forces, but I do think that, like, as an individual, it is important to understand each area, and if you're interested in all of those areas, there's nothing stopping you from learning more about that and, like, to dive into those sorts of things. But I do think that you should have formal training in those separate disciplines, and you as a practitioner are then responsible for combining those and understanding what this kind of return to play, return to performance kind of realm is. And I think if you ask, like, talking about the future of rehab and physical therapy, I think what we need to do is, like, nowadays you see so many people, like, so many courses are essentially just like strength and conditioning for physical therapists, or how to be a strength coach and a PT at the same time, those sorts of things, which is great. And, like, we know that we need more education when it comes to truly, like, traditional S&C type coaching within the rehab space. But I think it should also probably go a little bit further and now go into the, like, what is sports science for physical therapy? Like, what does that actually look like? Because there are principles within those sorts of domains that do have carryover across. Like, the Venn diagram of S&C, sports science, and physical therapy is very overlapped, and there's very few areas that are siloed and specific. And so I think the return to play practitioner, so to speak, is somebody that can kind of sit in the middle, but recognize when you need to, like, really sit in one silo and say, okay, is this person safe to to work within a rehab setting, or do they need medical attention? Like that's a lot more on the physical therapy side of things. Like, can you clear a joint? Can you clear safety? Can you go through these sorts of things? Go through an upper and lower quarter screen. Then once you get more towards the like, is this person ready to run? Still probably more PT-ish, but like you're still incorporating sports science elements and physical capacity elements from S&C. Then once you get into like, is this person ready to sprint, change direction? You're getting further and further away from the rehab side of things and more within the S&C and sports science. And then once we get back into the return to play setting and they are consistently performing in their sport, now it's a little bit of S&C, but also a little bit more sports science of continuous monitoring, and making sure that that individual isn't, changing over time. And then you just kind of like, you as a practitioner need to understand the setting well enough to then understand like which hat for you to put on and take off. And most of the time you're wearing multiple hats at the same time.
I think like you kind of tied that into a like good bow. Like, what setting am I in? Right? Like there's almost like that contextual factor. Like if you're, like, I mean, what my business is like, it's a bunch of active adults who want to do, like, I'm kind of just helping, like, yes, I'm helping with people with pain, but like they're already like pretty much medically cleared, right? Like there's like we rule out red flags pretty quickly. I rule like those types of things out like as part of just the screening, right? And it's like, how do we keep active adults like engaged in a plan in orienting it around their goals and like having fun and not just kicking the crap out of themselves through training, which is like very common for adults, who are navigating stress in multiple areas of life, right? Like, so that contextualization of like, well, what am I doing here? Like, yeah, I have a background in like personal training and coaching, and then I went to physical therapy school, and it's like there's blends of these things and like just self-management, right? But like how far I've gone down the rabbit hole of being like a performance coach in like a team setting for a university, like not very far at all. Like, am I confident like I could figure out the principles and get better at that? Yeah, but like without being in that setting, I'm not going to get those skills, right? Like, and so like, but I do think you mentioned something really important, and it's just like the overarching, Venn diagram of like these, like what are the principles that make them all. It's almost the principles that make them all come together, and then it makes the lines between them almost a little bit blurry, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Like, what are your principles? Is maybe just a good question, Dylan. Like, what are the principles that you're always going back to?
Yeah. So it's a really good question. I think I am still forming my like converged, process, right? Because like I said before, the you almost think about it similar to human movement of like dynamic systems theory, ecological dynamics, all those sorts of things where like the environment itself is going to bring about the individual's like attractor state and their like most optimal way to execute a certain task and all these sorts of things. I think similarly to being a coach and being a practitioner, the environment that you're in is going to bring about the different hats that you take on and take off, right? So like, when it comes to like specific principles, I can walk through like from a rehab standpoint, like what my basic principles are. They're probably pretty boring because they should be agreeable in almost all settings, right? So like if there's an injury, first step is to, or like first principle overall is what we've already talked about. Is this person safe to do the things that I'm about to ask them to do, right? Is this person for rehab or not? That's like the like first and foremost step. Obviously we can go into the methods behind that, but the overarching principle is safety. From there, it's okay. Now do like the next overarching principle is that takes the most time within rehab is, do they have the capacities to perform whatever the task it is that I have, that I'm asking for them? And normally we start baseline of range of motion. Do you have sufficient range of motion to complete whatever task it is? If you do not, normally that is the first step. However, that's also something where you have, again, that environment that is going to dictate what is sufficient range of motion versus what isn't, right? If we're talking about a squat versus a sprint, right, there's probably certain stiffness in the ankle that is beneficial for one but not for the other, right? So which task are we asking for this individual, and then therefore like how much range of motion? Yes, you still should probably have around 20 degrees at bare minimum of ankle dorsiflexion range of motion, but how you get to that is also going to be very different. Is that through like a dynamic, forceful hip extension and impact velocity into the ground so that you have that kind of overcoming moment into the ankle, like, and that's how you're achieving that 20 degrees. Okay, right? Like for me, if that is your terminal task, I want to preserve some of that stiffness within the ankle first and foremost before trying to get that range of motion back. Because when we think about things like post-op Achilles and calf muscle strain, like that range of motion is not always something that I'm like trying to really crank on. I just let that do its thing, and normally it comes back over time with like weight-bearing dorsiflexion, loaded tasks like squatting and lunging and those sorts of things. That's a little bit of a tangent. From a principle side of things, right? Range of motion, do they have sufficient, joint excursion and or tissue extensibility to complete the task? From there, it's, okay, do they have sufficient, force production in a constrained environment to complete a task that I'm asking them to do? So what that normally looks like is, can they produce force in a specific position? Can they do an isometric calf raise or an isometric heel raise? Can they do a seated knee extension? Can they do a hip bridge or something along those lines? Can they recruit the muscle that I know is going to be important for whatever task completion it is? Or can they do the thing in the quote unquote weakest link, right? So like, what is going to be the rate limiter within this environment? Let's ask that specific rate limiter to do the thing that we are specifically asking of it, which is produce force, and make sure that we can do so in a constrained environment. So once we have range of motion and isolated, for lack of a better term, strength checked off, then we can start bringing in, okay, can we integrate this into what people would say is a more quote unquote functional activity? Can they do a squat? Can they do a lunge? Can they do, an A skip, a B skip? Can we integrate those sorts of individual components into a task that requires multiple of them, right? Normally you start out with, does something require a little bit of force and a little bit of range of motion? Then a lot of force and still a little bit of range of motion. Then add in both force and range of motion. And then you can start sprinkling in other qualities. Concentric power, rate of force development, reactive strength, right? Like those are all separate qualities that we can then also start to titrate in to the individual's kind of progression plan. Once you get that far along in a rehab setting, you're kind of in the clear to then start being a lot more interactive with the athlete and then getting more sport specific, because by the time you've essentially checked off all those boxes, that individual is probably already pretty safe to participate in a lot of activities within sport. And now it's just like, okay, what are the unique characteristics that make this individual tick, so to speak? Like what makes this person special within their sport? And then let's lean in and double down on those characteristics, right? Like, yeah, I'm a big basketball guy and I love talking and thinking about basketball. And the analogy that I always give is like, you're not going to like talk to Luka Doncic and be like, okay, we really need to improve your reactive strength because you're super slow. It's like, that's probably wasted time, because it's going to take so much energy and so much effort for him. He's probably like in a constrained environment, considering the elite level that he's performing at, he may as well already have high quality reactive strength numbers.
Yeah.
But like when you look at him on the court, he's slow, he's methodical, he's shifty, but he also drops 40 points a game on any given night, So it's like,
he's like the most like athletic looking dude that is the best basketball player you've ever seen, type of thing.
yeah.
Right?
And so it's like,
I mean, him and Jokic, right? Like they both are kind of similar, right? Like,
mm-hmm.
and
so
then it's funny. Yeah, keep going. I'm sorry. Yeah,
all I was gonna say is like, nobody's going to like sit here and say that those guys aren't amazing at what they do.
Exactly, right?
So like, you can no longer stand on your 2 feet and say, this guy's rate limiter is reactive strength, or this guy's rate limiter is, sprinting. It's like, no, like sure, maybe if you made him like a little bit faster, he might have slightly better metrics and fast break points or something like that. But like, I don't know, like that's not his strong suit. So like, let's find whatever the thing is that person's strong suit and really lean into that, so that when they get back on the field, when they get back on the court, they can say, I feel like myself again, rather than being like, oh yeah, I do feel like, there are certain components that I'm better with, but like, I don't feel like I'm playing the same way that I did before.
Yeah. It's you know Dan Cleather, or of Dan Cleather, right? Like so much, like I literally have the little black book of training wisdom right in front of me, because like it's just a good reminder, like to try to keep things relatively simple. And it's like, just you talk about like the terminal task, and it's like, what is this person trying to do? And when it comes to like, there is a difference too between like, you got like high level athletes, and then you got people who just want to be healthy and strong, and they're almost like comparison is what's driving like what they do in training. And it's like, no, like focus on your strengths. Like, now, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm 37. I love the Olympic lifts. Like, am I built to do them? No, I'm not very elastic. I'm not very like quick and powerful. Am I getting better at them? Yeah. Would I probably just be better off like as an athlete to just like honestly probably focus on endurance oriented sports? Yeah, but like you're just trying to get better at the terminal task, the task you want to get better at. But it is like, where's a waste of time here? Or where's like, are we trying to change something that we should just like not change and just reinforce what makes that person, capable and strong and good, right? And it's the same thing with like, every time somebody posts LeBron James like lifting and training video, like it's like the whole world is like, this is terrible. But like he's arguably the most resilient basketball player and most efficient player of all time, right? And so whatever he's doing works, amongst his just high level basketball skill, right? And that's one of the things I think in our field. I talk to other practitioners. It's just this constant like FOMO, constant what's next, what's new, and that's not bad, but if it's at the expense of understanding the principles of like what you're talking about. Like a lot of times, like rehab, the people who lean into like it's probably going to be kind of a boring phase of training for you, right? But that's okay. Like, because we're just trying to establish and like bring up these capacities that have been affected, right? And that's not always sexy. You can try to do other things and make it fun, but like, what do you like? Okay, so this post yesterday or a couple days ago, right? This is kind of a hard transition here, but like, you talk about answering questions at the level they were asked, right? So like, what do you mean by that? Explain that like for me in the dumbest way you can.
Yeah.
Right?
So this is actually a fun thought, or this idea. So the concept of answering a question from the level with which it's asked is actually a like more philosophical question from like years and years and years ago that has nothing to do with performance rehab or anything like that. And where I originally heard it was in like a discussion on whether or not humans have free will, which is like an insanely like ethereal topic and like not at all anything that listeners right now probably are interested in. But it sparked an idea in my head, which now like I think about quite often. But the idea, like I'll give the background of that conversation so that hopefully it informs like this one. But what the conversation was is like, if you are asking about free will, and you're questioning it from the level of a human being, right? But then the people that deny the concept of free will are answering it at the level of like the universe, so to speak, right? It's like, yes, what you do does not necessarily influence different areas, and so does that translate to like you are like pretty much when you zoom out far enough, we're all going to die at some point. So like, does it really matter? Now, when you zoom back in, like me as an individual in this moment, yes, I have free will. I could scroll in my mouse and I could hit the leave button. We could end this podcast right now, ultimately up to my decision, right? So yes, I do have autonomy in my actions on a day-to-day basis. And that is the question that we're asking. We're not asking, does free will exist at a universal level? Because maybe it doesn't. But like for me in this moment right now, does it exist? So now, putting this into context within a rehab or physical performance space, I want to preface this by saying I'm most likely in the wrong here, and that it's because I've had conversations with people significantly smarter than me about this, and they continue to go back and say similar things. So like I'm acknowledging that this is somewhat different, but this is what kind of makes the most sense in my head. There's a term called supermaximal eccentrics, and I have been somewhat against that term. For this exact reason. And so when you look at like supermaximal eccentrics is a very, very well-defined term in the research. And so this is why I'm saying I'm probably wrong. People like vehemently agree that supermaximal eccentrics are a thing, and they're defined by the fact that you are performing an eccentric muscle action that you could not perform isometrically or concentrically. You're being exposed to a load that can only be experienced eccentrically to complete a task, right? It is an overcoming force on your body that you have to kind of like withstand. However, how they define supermaximal is based on isometric strength. So they say your isometric force production, because when you think about the force velocity curve, right, it goes higher and higher as you get to slower velocities. And then if you look at that XY axis and expand it into the negative X value, right, that becomes now an eccentric contraction. It continues to go up until it flatlines after a certain velocity of eccentric muscle actions. So with that, what we're saying is we are defining something based on an isometric muscle action. So how much force can you produce isometrically? And then you're saying anything above that line is supermaximal, which is correct. It's supermaximal for an isometric. But eccentrics inherently can tolerate greater and greater loads. So it can't be a supramaximal eccentric, because the definition, you're not, like, going back to the original term, you're not answering the question at the level with which it's asked, because you're technically asking the question based on eccentrics, and then you're answering the question at the level of isometrics. And so it's like, okay, there's an inherent, like, theoretical flaw in how we're describing these sorts of things. Does this have any application to, like, real life training and all those sorts of things? No, we're talking about nomenclature and, like, those sorts of things. So I understand this isn't that important of a topic, but it's just one thing where I'm like, I continue to go back to and say, like, we should still question things even if they're validated within the research, because if you don't have a causal understanding or a basic relationship and understanding to what this thing is trying to describe, then we're just going to, like, basically accept the fact, right? There's a meme that goes around on the internet probably once every 2 years in the rehab space where it's a ton of, like, this massive stack of blocks, right? And, like, these blocks are all stacked up in, like, this awkward area, and there's an arrow to all the blocks, and it says, you know, the totality of evidence on a given topic. And then on the right side of, like, this stack of blocks, there's just this tiny little sliver that's holding everything up. And then there's another arrow that just says, like, an underlying assumption that has no, like, factual basis or something along those lines. It's like, that's kind of the perspective that I have with this, where we don't actually have a lot of, like, truly quality underpinning understandings of these sorts of things. We're just saying, yeah, okay, this is a supermaximal eccentric, and now we're going to create a whole host of research based on this assumption, when in reality it's like, well, there's nothing supermaximal about it. If you are defining supermaximal based on eccentrics and you're experiencing a load greater than what you could tolerate eccentrically, it's most likely tissue failure, right? So it's most likely an injury. That is, like, the stance that I take.
So, like, I appreciate that you're a stickler for, like, honestly, nomenclature, agree upon terms, because you're so right. Like, there's so much of the arguments are just essentially people arguing about, like, things that are essentially the same but different categorization. And have you ever read Mladen Jovanovich's, like, strength manual?
I have not, no.
Dude,
I don't even know if I've heard about it.
It's a great book. It's just I think it's just called Strength Training Manual by Mladen. But what that book taught me is, like, it's just very important to categorize things. Like, humans, we just need good categories, right? And, like, a lot of it is making having a good rationale in the categorization of stuff. Like, you know, John Keeley basically kind of broke down, like, that periodization theory. It does not hold up, especially in a team setting, right? Like, now for individuals, I think what individuals really crave is, like, the structure of, like, yeah, you're in this phase, you're in a development phase, right? Now, does the physiology actually, like, follow that? Who knows, right? It kind of depends on, like, what you're talking about, just how well you control for the aspects that you're trying to bring about, right? But this is, like, a good segue into, you know, force testing and, you know, the utility of objective data. I mean, even I just bought, like, I bought the OVR. Sorry, dude, I shouldn't tell you this, but I bought the OVR jump thing. I have a terrible vertical, like, not doing very well on that front. But some of these things, it's like where you start to get more objective. In the rehab space, like, yeah, like, if I can tell that your quad is not like, you're not putting out very much force, and we're lagging on, you know, your return to play type of thing, it's like, all right, we know what we need to bring up here, right? So why is like, the, you know, force testing so important? Maybe to just play devil's advocate, where is it not so important? And just, like, what's, like, got you, you know, excited about, like, being involved with Vald and, like, just being involved in that side of the performance realm?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it is helpful to go back to the early conversation about principles, right? So some of the principles that I outlined were essentially, does this individual have sufficient, force production or range of motion or whatever it is to perform the task at hand? And so in order to answer that question, you need to know a couple things, right? How are you defining sufficient, right? How much load is incurred at that terminal task, and how much load does that individual have the capability to perform at this current moment, right? So there's like kind of three separate things. And so there's three different ways that you can answer that, right? Understanding, quote unquote, what is sufficient. There's areas like normative data, right? So VALD internally has what are called norms, which are their internal data sets created from all, like, you can opt out, obviously. It's your data, you own it, so you're allowed to do whatever the heck you want with it. But the thousands of VALD clients around the world, all using things like ForceDecks, they'll jump on it every day. So we have quite literally millions upon millions of individual tests, right? So we have a ton of data within what we call the VALD data lakehouse. And so what we use with that is to create benchmarks and normative data associated with pretty much any test and metric that we provide based on the VALD suite of systems. That is very helpful to then categorize people. Like you said before, humans just want categories, right? So if you say, okay, we just did a counter movement jump, and when it comes to eccentric peak power, you are in the 71st percentile. You are performing or outperforming 71% of people based on your sex and age, right, that have performed this test before. So with that, we can say, all right, eccentric peak power, you're probably pretty solid. However, your jump height is still only in the 25th percentile. So what the heck's going on, right? So now we can start to categorize and say when we have like what is sufficient, that's up to the practitioner to say what area where do I have significantly greater confidence in your ability to perform whatever task it is at a given level, right? We have research-related benchmarks. You take knee extension, right, and you can calculate torque from it. A lot of times people just say, hey, 3 Newton meters per kilogram is probably a decent benchmark to sit on, and say you like force is probably, once you hit that, force is probably no longer the rate limiter of safety, right? There are other physical capacities and qualities, right? There's rate of force development, there's power, there's reactive strength, like there's other qualities that we can probably work on. But when it comes to peak force production, if you can hit 3 Newton meters per kilogram, you become a lot more confident that force is no longer the rate limiter. So going back to the question of what is sufficient, we kind of talked about that with normative data. We were able to answer that question a little bit more confidently, knowing that we have a lot of this sort of data to support it. And then when we look at, what does the individual, like what loads are experienced within that task? Well, that's where we can look into the research, right? We can look into people that have, 5 camera, 27 camera, whatever motion capture systems with 3D force plates embedded into the ground, and they can use inverse dynamics to be able to calculate, hey, people will always say the knee experiences, 5.6 times body weight or 6.8 times body weight during a maximal velocity deceleration, or the calf experiences 12 times body weight when you're accelerating or doing any kind of plyometric activity. It's like, okay, what does that really mean? And what that means is like that when you calculate moment arms from the ankle to the Achilles, or from the center of the knee joint to the patellar tendon or to the kneecap, and then you calculate the total force, you can kind of extrapolate and say, all right, there's this amount of tensile force going through the quadricep versus the Achilles versus the calf musculature or whatever it is. So there you kind of have a basic understanding of, we know that there's probably certain benchmarks that we now need to hit in order for us to, again, have a certain level of confidence that tensile strength from the tissue level is no longer the rate limiter. Finally, these sort of factors are the reason why we go into objective testing. If we know what the total population can sort of generally produce, and then we know what a specific task asks of that individual, then we can then go in and say, okay, now what does this person have quality and capacity wise? Do you have 2.7 Newton meters per kilogram of torque production at the quad? Is that sufficient? Well, it's probably sufficient to do a couple things, right? Is there a certain level of error within that test where it could be anywhere between 2.5 and 3.0 based on a given test? Yeah, most likely. But with all that kind of stuff, what the whole purpose of this is, are you confident that this thing is no longer the rate limiter? And I think objective testing is the thing that provides the most amount of confidence for a practitioner. Now, there are practitioners that may be more confident in their skills of subjective assessment, which is okay. However, what tends to happen is they will go through a subjective assessment and they say, yes, my confidence is at 85% that this person is ready to go. And then we say, okay, sounds great. Let's just do one or two objective assessments, like a counter movement jump or a knee extension, isometric, or something along those, a Nordic. And then once they get that feedback, there is this discontinuity between what their subjective assessment said and what their objective assessment said. Then we start to have a better conversation on, okay, it's not that those subjective assessments are bad, right? Those are totally fine. You can continue with them. But if we want to have greater and greater confidence that this individual is actually going to be safe in their return, let's start to incorporate things that truly give objective feedback and comparison benchmarks to the thing that we're interested in. That was a bit of a long-winded answer, but hopefully that's helpful.
Well, I think you hit it on the goal of a lot of this stuff for both, the practitioner and the person returning to sport, returning to their terminal task or whatever is, so okay, like literally talked to one of my clients, athletes this morning, and like, she gets some twinges of hamstring pain with like running, right? Especially as speed increases, like she gets the more twinges, and it's like, all right, so how do we navigate this, right? Well, some of it is, are you okay with maintaining a certain amount of workload and speed and duration of movement until basically you have less subjective testing, right? Or less subjective like sensitivity, right? Which A, not a bad way to do it, but B, it's like, all right, can we do some form of strength assessment or force production assessment or speed assessment, right? Rate of force development, XYZ, that helps inject more data, right? And then brings up the level of confidence that like I'm not going to tear my hamstring, right? Like I can. This is like good, right? And so yeah, we're like, especially when we have things that are big and complex, like an ACL reconstruction plus rehab, like the more we can like provide confidence and actually a true assessment of things, the better off we're probably going to be, right? And it's like, it's just using, both somebody's clinical skills and judgment alongside. Rehab is good decision making. Part of good decision making is having adequate information to make good decisions, right? And, even just like, can a barbell squat be a good assessment? Yeah, but like there's also a lot of things going on in a barbell squat. Like people are master compensators, right? And like, is that good or bad? Kind of depends, right? Like it's kind of like you're talking about with Luca. Like that dude's just compensating for the things that he's not good at with other high level skills, right? Which is awesome. And so it's like, how do we like basically make sure we have confidence for the task we're trying to achieve, and we figure out what's you've read Thinking in Systems, right? Or you've seen Thinking in Systems, the book Thinking in Systems.
Yeah,
Like,
I've heard of it. One thing that's interesting on my end is I don't have like the best attention span, right? Like I tell people like I can read things. Yeah, I was like I tell people I can read things 8 to 12 pages at a time, which is exactly the length of most research papers, and like I'm good with that. But I don't read a lot of books. It's to be honest, like it's something I go back and forth. I'm like, should I? Maybe, but like I don't know. I feel like I learned.
I
read
think
enough.
like dude, I'm like research. I honestly I just listen to like Q, Willie. Like I just like listen to some of these people who have consumed a lot of it, and then I like try to just make sure that like my summarizations and XYZ. But like, dude, I honestly I think it was from PT school. I just started looking at research papers, and like my just brain would like shut down because of just information overload, and like so. But books like I think just help me kind of like, I don't know, get in the stuff. There's a little bit more story even with books, I think, which helps my simple mind. But basically Thinking in Systems is like, yeah, like we're humans are a dynamic system. Like there's a lot of factors. And we want to figure out in this system, like what are the limiters? What are the things we can actually control? Because a lot of things we kind of can't, right? And again, that's just the nature of the environment. All right, I know, kind of wrap up here. The calf and Achilles, like these seem to be areas that you were particularly interested in. Is that something that came about because of your own experience, or just like you kind of figured out this is the body part that I'm going all in on? And then like finally also like, how do you train as a guy? How old are you now, Dylan?
I'm 28 years old.
To be 28 again. I'm 37. Give me 9 years back with like a slightly more like intelligent look on how I should train and whatnot. But like, yeah, give me a little bit about the calf and the Achilles, and then just like what you do to stay in shape and healthy and happy.
Yeah, man. So the calf was an interesting project. Still love reading about it and still love learning about it. Pretty much, I back to the beginning of the podcast when I described working with people like Informed Performance and all these sorts of things. We wanted to create a quality resource, and we were just sort of trying to rack our brains about what area is still important but doesn't get a lot of attention. And we had landed on like the calf and the Achilles, just because this was, I can't remember the year. This was 2023, 2024. I think mostly like it got released in 2024. I started the project in 2023. So this was right at the beginning, I should say, of when, people in the NBA, people in the NFL, like the Achilles ruptures have just consistently gone up over the last 5 to 10 years. So I shouldn't say right at the beginning, but like it was in the heart of it, but still, like, at least in the rehab space, everyone was still focused on ACLs, still focused on hamstring strains, still focused on hip scopes and all these sorts of things. And so we were like, all right, well, we know that there's a lot of data out there when it comes to the calf and the Achilles, right? It's significantly easier to model data to structures that are closer to the ground than structures that are further away, right? To understand, like, the analogy I give is it's really difficult to be confident in the amount of load going into the, L2 facet, right, on the left side. But it's a lot easier for us to understand how much load is going through the Achilles because the ground reaction force doesn't have very far to travel, right? So in that, biomechanics data is a lot more robust when it comes to the lower limb, the ankle, the calf, the Achilles, some of the intrinsic foot muscles as well. So with that, we're like, okay, we can create a pretty biomechanics heavy resource that informs people on a whole host of different objective assessments as well as just anatomy and physiology of this area. So that's kind of what we did. It worked out, and people seem to like it. So yeah, I've helped out when it comes to a lot of calf and Achilles rehabs. I've consulted on some higher level cases. I have, done a bunch of different projects associated with it. It's really fun. I just, for whatever reason, it's an interesting area. It doesn't get a lot of attention. And I would argue that, like, it's one of those areas that people don't, like, athletes and general population individuals, like, people just don't train their calves enough. So you can make a lot of difference very quickly by just doing the basics really well. Which kind of furloughs and transitions well into what I do for training. Like, at the moment, so currently in this moment, I am trying to get a little bit better when it comes to running volume. I've never been really like a distance runner. I am 5'4" on a good day, and my leg length is not my strong suit. So like running and endurance running has never been something that I've like been very good with. So it's just something that I'm trying to, work on a little bit. No goals of, trying to compete or doing a half marathon or a marathon or an ultra or anything like that. I just like trying to train for new things. So with that, I'm just trying to keep up my minimums when it comes to kind of the basic resistance training things, right? Squat, bench, deadlift, clean, snatch, right? Just like do the basics and continue on with those sorts of things. And then I try to sprint every now and then. My wife ran track in college and will absolutely ruin me every time we go to a track. And so it's a great feeling. And yeah, so I enjoy speed. I like some of the higher level cases that I mentioned before that I've consulted on is within track and field. And it's just like a passion of mine along with basketball. So those are like the two areas that I just love geeking out on the most. So yeah, that's kind of like mostly my training, most of the calf. But yeah.
Yeah, I love it, dude. I think like okay, this was the rude awakening as I got into my 30s is like, well, I just kind of went all in on like I'm gonna lift, lifting's what I need, whatever. And then I like went back and I tried to play rugby like 3 or 4 years ago, and I just I just kept straining everything. Like, I grew up very active, and like so I think
Mm-hmm.
that carried over, and I never stopped doing stuff, into my 20s, and even in PT school we played so much basketball. It was awesome. But then like I got my first clinic job, and we spent like 3 or 4 years just kind of just going to the gym and lifting, and I was just like no elasticity, no mobility type of thing, and then like yeah, man, calves, it's like just train those suckers, like put them through some strain and like do it, and I've gotten better at that, but like yeah, it's And then also just the dose of stuff. Like I just think there's a lot of like people who are underdosing people. I'm like, I just think a lot of people need a lot of easy work, like over a long period of time. A lot of quote unquote, just like make it hard enough, right? Type of stuff over a long period of time. And I think we have a hard time with that. But that's also where getting objective really helps and seeing what's actually driving things. But yeah, so I love it, man. I'm glad to hear. And yeah, good luck with your wife. I'm sure she'll keep dusting you for a while.
Oh yeah, that's never gonna change. She's like 5'10", 5'11", and
I was
her
gonna
like
say in
length
your
is her
picture, I
strong
think
suit. Yeah.
she looks a little taller than you, which
Oh,
she's probably got
100%.
longer legs, like
Yeah,
so.
just like significantly better looking, more athletic, smarter. Like she does surgery and all these sorts of things, and I just like sit around on my computer and talk about the calf. So,
There you go.
yeah, it's great. But yeah, and even with the calf stuff, it always reminds me of this meme that I should probably just make and post one of these days. But like the bell curve meme of like somebody who's not very educated, somebody who's like just educated enough to be dangerous, and then somebody who's been in the space for a while. And I think the same thing when it comes to like the calf, the ankle, and the foot. It's like the person who's like hasn't been in the space for a while, they're like, it's the calf is a muscle. You should probably train muscles heavy and for long periods of time. And then in the middle, it's like, well, there's 33 joints in the foot. There's like, the Achilles is coiled medially, and we have like these sorts of structures and all these sorts of things. And so we need to train it very specifically with, these toes floating and these toes not, and like this wedge underneath the medial side of the foot, like all these different things, which like, again, well intended and can be very helpful for the right person at the right time. But at the end of the day, like it's probably not doing the exact thing that we think it is.
Yeah,
Body's
right.
too complex. And then on the other end of the things, once you test a lot of those like foot wedge stuff out for a while, you're probably like, it's probably just a low load stimulus. And then if we exactly. If we just go a little bit heavier and allow that person to adapt to the thing that is actually injuring them, which is the load, they'll probably get better over time. So like that's kind of the way I approach things when it comes to the calf. Like, we don't need to make it all that complicated. But at the same time, the foot can be something that's fun to geek out on. So I acknowledge that.
I love that. I mean, there's specific strategies, like you said, at specific times and specific graded exposure. Like, yeah, but like so much of it just boils down to like, yeah, that works for a little bit, and then it's like, okay, get back into just hammer some heavy standing calf raises, right?
Yeah, I mean, like you go back to like what are the principles, right? Like if you need to allow that the area to recover to a certain extent, then sure, you can play around with a whole bunch of things that restore mobility or can allow for accessory, muscle actions or accessory muscles to improve their, capacities. That's one thing with the calf is that like you can't hide from calf load. And so it's really important to make sure that the other areas of your body can withstand loads because they need to be there to support. So like when it comes to calf rehabs and things like that, like a lot of times when I consult with cases or I chat with people, they're like, really? Like that's all we're doing with the calf? It's like, yeah, we load the calf, but there's only so many ways you can load the calf. So like while we're doing this, let's also make sure the quadriceps, the hamstrings, and the glutes are incredibly strong as well. So like that's kind of the thought process there. And so when you look at the principles of this idea, it's like, yeah, if we do foot mobility training, if we do these different ideas, like that's not bad. I do not want to bash any of those sorts of things. I still use them as well. However, when you zoom out far enough, you say, what is going on? It's like, okay, we're just underloading that area so that we can improve confidence within some basic movement capacity and movement capability within this area. And then that individual in turn is like, okay, I'm starting to feel better, starting to feel a little bit more confident in loading that area. Okay, cool. Let's try something heavier and see how it feels.
Yep. Yeah. Love it. Where do people find you, Dylan?
It's a great question. When it comes to reaching out, I have just accepted the fact that I'm terrible with DMs. So you can DM me, but I'm significantly better when it comes to email response. So you can email me at d.carmody@vault.com. It's probably the email I'm the most responsive with. You can reach out to me on socials if you want or follow along. My handle is dcr.dpt. Those are probably the two places that are easiest to kind of contact and find me. So we'll go there. If you want to chat to me on LinkedIn, I can do that too, but I don't really post there. So
Yeah. Love it, dude. Hey, I appreciate you, man. This is great. Everybody check out Dylan, and I'll get this posted soon, buddy. So appreciate your time.
Dave, this is awesome, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, see ya.
Later.